The night I changed my life started with a delivery I almost canceled. Rain hammered the streets of Chicago so hard it blurred the traffic lights into streaks of red and gold. My phone battery sat at 3%. My sneakers were soaked. My insulated delivery bag felt twice as heavy as it had 3 hours earlier. All I wanted was to finish my final order and go home. At 27, I had learned that exhaustion could become a permanent roommate. Rent was due in 5 days. My car needed repairs I could not afford. And my landlord had already left 2 reminders taped to my apartment door. The city around me looked beautiful in the rain. My life did not. I pedaled my old bicycle through the cold wind, cutting across a quieter section of the riverfront to save time. Most people had already disappeared indoors. Office towers glowed above the water like giant lanterns. The sidewalks were nearly empty. That was why I noticed him. At first, he looked like nothing more than a shadow near a bench overlooking the river. I almost rode past. Almost. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the area, and I saw a man slumped awkwardly against the railing. My hands tightened around the handlebars. For a second, I hesitated. Chicago taught people not to get involved. Keep moving. Mind your business. Protect yourself first. I had heard those lessons my entire life, but something felt wrong. I parked my bicycle and hurried toward him. Rain soaked my jacket immediately. The closer I got, the more unusual the scene became. The man was dressed in clothing that looked expensive even through the storm. A dark overcoat, polished shoes, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my yearly income. Yet he sat alone beside the river with rain pouring over him. "Sir," I called out. No response. My pulse quickened. "Sir, can you hear me?" This time he stirred slightly. Relief washed through me. At least he was conscious. I crouched beside him. He looked to be in his mid-30s. Dark hair damp from the rain. Strong features. Pale skin. There was something striking about him, even in that condition. His eyes opened briefly. Sharp gray eyes. Confused. Tired. Lost. "You need help?" I said. He tried to speak but stopped. The effort alone seemed difficult. "I am calling an ambulance." His hand moved weakly as if he wanted to object. "Do not." His voice was barely audible above the rain. I stared at him. That was not a suggestion. He almost smiled. Almost. Then his eyes closed again. I pulled out my phone and called for help anyway. While we waited, I stayed beside him beneath the storm. Minutes passed. Traffic hissed in the distance. Wind whipped across the river. He never asked who I was. I never asked who he was. We were simply 2 strangers sitting in the rain. At one point his eyes opened again. They settled on me with quiet confusion. "Why are you still here?" he asked. I laughed softly. "Because somebody should be." For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not gratitude. Not surprise. Something deeper. As if nobody had given him that answer in a very long time. The ambulance lights finally appeared in the distance, reflecting across the wet pavement. I had no idea who the man beside me was. I had no idea that every decision I made after that moment would lead me somewhere I never imagined. The ambulance doors closed, and I stood alone in the rain watching the flashing lights disappear into the night. For a few seconds, I considered getting back on my bicycle and finishing the delivery that was still sitting in my insulated bag. Then my phone buzzed. A notification informed me that the order had already been canceled. Another reminder appeared immediately afterward. Rent due in 5 days. I stared at the screen and laughed softly. Somehow that felt like the most predictable part of my evening. By the time I reached the hospital, my hair was dripping water onto the waiting room floor. I did not even know why I had followed the ambulance. Maybe curiosity. Maybe guilt. Maybe because something about the stranger by the river refused to leave my mind. The emergency department was busy despite the late hour. Nurses moved quickly between stations. Families sat in rows of plastic chairs. Television screens glowed quietly overhead. I approached the reception desk. "The man who came in from the riverfront," I said. "Is he okay?" The receptionist looked at me over her glasses. "Are you family?" "No. Friend." I hesitated. "Not exactly." She offered a polite smile. Then I cannot share any medical information. Fair enough. I thanked her and sat down anyway. I told myself I would stay for 5 minutes. Just long enough to know whether he was stable. 5 minutes became 20. 20 became 40. The rain continued tapping against the hospital windows while midnight slowly approached. Finally, a nurse stepped into the waiting area. Emily Carter? My head snapped up. Yes. The patient asked for you. I blinked. Me. She nodded. Room 312. Confused, I followed her down a quiet hallway. The room was dim except for a lamp near the bed. The stranger looked considerably better than he had beside the river. Dry clothes. Warm blankets. Color returning to his face. Yet he still seemed exhausted. His gray eyes shifted toward me when I entered. You stayed, he said quietly. I folded my arms. Apparently so. A faint smile appeared. It transformed his entire face. For the first time, he looked less intimidating and more human. Most people would not have. Most people probably have better judgment. The smile widened slightly. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Just unexpected. I glanced toward the window overlooking the city. Chicago glittered beneath the rain like a field of scattered diamonds. You should be home, he said. You should be resting. Fair point. He studied me for a moment. What do you do? I laughed softly. Right now? Mostly struggle. That earned another small smile. Professionally. Delivery driver. Food delivery. Grocery delivery. Whatever pays. His gaze lingered on my worn jacket draped over a chair. Something thoughtful crossed his expression. And yet you spent half your night helping a stranger. I shrugged. Someone had to. For a second he looked away. Toward the city lights beyond the glass. Toward something only he could see. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded different. Quieter. Thank you, Emily. Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely personal. I stood. Well, try not to end up beside a river in the rain again. A soft laugh escaped him. I will do my best. I turned toward the door. Goodbye. Goodbye, Emily. I left without asking his name. Without asking who he was. Without realizing that somewhere beyond those hospital walls, an entire city was already searching for the man I had just walked away from. The next week passed like every other week in my life. Long shifts. Cold mornings. Too many bills. Not enough money. By Friday, the strange man from the hospital had almost become a memory. Almost. Every now and then, I caught myself wondering if he was doing better. Then I would shake the thought away and focus on the next delivery. Life did not leave much room for strangers. Especially strangers whose watches looked more expensive than my apartment. That Friday afternoon, I was picking up coffee from a crowded cafe when I noticed something unusual. Every television inside the shop was tuned to the same news channel. Customers who normally stared at their phones were watching the screens instead. A headline stretched across the bottom. Missing billionaire CEO reappears after mysterious disappearance. I barely paid attention at first. Wealthy executives disappearing and reappearing had nothing to do with me. Then the camera switched to a photograph. The coffee carrier nearly slipped from my hands. It was him. The man from the river. The man from the hospital. The man whose name I never learned. My heart skipped. The screen showed him standing in front of a gleaming skyscraper. Dark suit. Confident expression. Surrounded by reporters. The caption beneath the image read, Ethan Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Global. I stared at the television in disbelief. The reporter continued speaking. After concerns spread across financial markets regarding his unexplained absence last week, Ethan Blackwell has officially returned to work. The billionaire entrepreneur has declined to comment on where he was during the missing hours. Billionaire. The word echoed inside my head. Billionaire. I glanced at the photograph again. Same eyes. Same face. Same man. A customer bumped into my shoulder and pulled me back to reality. I grabbed the coffee order and hurried outside, but my mind remained inside that cafe. The entire city apparently knew who Ethan Blackwell was. Somehow I had spent hours with him without recognizing him at all. During my lunch break, Curiosity finally won. I searched his name online. The results seemed endless. Business magazines, television interviews, corporate events, charity foundations, private jets, luxury penthouses, awards, lists ranking him among the most influential people in the country. Every article showed the same composed expression, the same powerful image. None of them looked like the exhausted man sitting alone beside the river in the rain. That was the part one could not reconcile. Later that evening, while delivering groceries to a luxury high-rise downtown, I looked up and saw a massive digital billboard displaying his face. It felt surreal. 1 week earlier I had been telling him to stay out of the rain. Now his image towered above the city skyline. I laughed softly to myself. What were the chances? Practically impossible. By the time I returned home, the entire thing felt like a strange coincidence I would eventually tell people about. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door and froze. Resting neatly on the floor just inside the entrance was a small white envelope. My name was written across the front in elegant handwriting. Emily Carter. My pulse quickened immediately. Slowly I picked it up. The paper felt expensive, deliberate, important. Inside was a simple note containing only one sentence. Thank you for staying. Beneath the message was a signature. Ethan Blackwell. I must have read the note 20 times that night. Thank you for staying. The words were simple, almost ordinary, yet they felt strangely heavy coming from a man whose face appeared on skyscrapers and business magazines. I placed the note on my kitchen table beside a stack of overdue bills and stared at the contrast. Billionaire CEO. Delivery driver. Those two worlds were not supposed to collide. By morning, I convinced myself the note was simply a polite gesture. Nothing more. Life moved on. Or at least it tried to. Saturday brought another 12-hour shift. The weather had finally improved. Sunlight reflected off glass towers as I navigated downtown traffic with my bicycle. The city felt alive again. Around noon, I picked up an expensive lunch order from a high-end restaurant I normally could not afford to enter as a customer. The receipt listed a destination I recognized immediately. Blackwell Global Headquarters. I actually laughed when I saw the address. Out of all the buildings in Chicago, the delivery app had chosen that one. The tower dominated the skyline. 48 floors of steel and glass. Security guards stood near the entrance while employees moved through revolving doors carrying laptops and coffee cups. I parked my bicycle outside and entered the lobby. Everything gleamed. Marble floors. Modern artwork. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It looked less like an office and more like the headquarters of a movie character. I approached the reception desk and gave the order number. The receptionist smiled politely. Someone will be down shortly. I waited near a seating area, trying not to look completely out of place. A few minutes later, movement near the elevators caught my attention. Several executives stepped into the lobby surrounded by assistants. Then I saw him. Ethan Blackwell. He was walking toward the entrance with the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. Dark suit, white shirt, focused expression. The entire room seemed to adjust around his presence. Conversations paused. Employees straightened slightly. He never appeared arrogant, just powerful. There was a difference. My first instinct was to look away. Instead, I found myself staring. Maybe because this version of him felt so different from the exhausted stranger beside the river. As if they were two separate people. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stopped walking. His eyes found mine across the lobby. Instantly. Directly. The executives beside him continued talking, but his attention shifted completely. For a second, neither of us moved. Then recognition appeared in his expression, followed by something warmer. Something human. He changed direction immediately. Toward me. My pulse accelerated. The receptionist looked confused. So did several employees nearby. Ethan stopped a few feet away. Emily. Hearing my name in that lobby felt surreal. I managed a small smile. Hello. His gaze moved briefly toward the delivery bag hanging from my shoulder. You are working. Usually. A faint laugh escaped him. I suppose that makes sense. For a moment, the billionaire CEO disappeared. The man from the hospital returned. The one who asked why I stayed. The one who looked lonely despite having everything. Ethan glanced toward the lunch order waiting on the reception counter. Then back at me. Would you have 10 minutes for coffee after your shift? The question caught me completely off guard. Around us, employees pretended not to stare. My heart suddenly felt much louder than the entire lobby. And for reasons I could not explain, saying no seemed far more difficult than it should have been. For the rest of my shift, I could not focus on anything. Every traffic light seemed longer. Every delivery address felt farther away. I kept replaying the conversation in the lobby. Not because Ethan Blackwell had asked me to have coffee with him. Because of the way he asked. There had been no arrogance. No expectation. No assumption that I would automatically say yes. If anything, he had sounded uncertain. The idea felt ridiculous. A man like Ethan Blackwell was probably responsible for billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. Uncertainty should not have existed in his world. Yet I had seen it. By 7 o'clock, my shift finally ended. The sun was beginning to set behind the Chicago skyline, painting the glass towers in gold and orange light. My phone buzzed. A single message appeared from an unknown number. There is a cafe across from Millennium Park. No pressure. If you decide not to come, I understand. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I laughed quietly. Somehow that message convinced me more than any grand gesture could have. 30 minutes later, I pushed open the door of the cafe. Warm air wrapped around me instantly. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the room. Soft music played in the background. Large windows overlooked the park, where people were still walking beneath the fading evening light. Ethan was already there. Of course he was. He sat near the window with a simple black coffee in front of him. No security team. No assistants. No reporters. Just him. When he noticed me, he stood immediately. The gesture caught me off guard. Emily. I sat across from him, suddenly aware of my worn jacket and delivery uniform. He seemed completely unaware of either. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for not making me meet you on the 48th floor of your building. A genuine laugh escaped him. It was the first time I had heard it. The sound transformed him. Made him seem younger somehow. Less distant. A server approached, and Ethan waited patiently while I ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu. Once we were alone again, silence settled briefly between us. Not awkward. Just unfamiliar. I owe you an explanation, he finally said. I raised an eyebrow. For sending mysterious notes to my apartment? That too. Another faint smile appeared. Then it faded. His expression grew thoughtful. After I left the hospital, I kept thinking about our conversation. I looked down at my coffee cup. It was not much of a conversation. It was more honest than most conversations I have in a month. That answer surprised me. He stared out the window for a moment. The city lights were beginning to appear one by one as evening deepened. Do you know what everyone wanted from me when I returned? He asked quietly. Interviews. Statements. Meetings. Explanations. His gaze shifted back to mine. You were the only person who asked whether I was okay. The words settled heavily between us. I did not know how to respond, because suddenly the image of Ethan Blackwell from television felt very different. The headlines described power, success, wealth. Yet sitting across from me was a man who sounded lonely. Deeply lonely. You have thousands of employees, I said softly. Millions of dollars. Billions. That is not helping your case. He laughed again. Then his expression softened. Money solves many problems, Emily. His eyes held mine. It does not solve all of them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the city glowed beneath the evening sky. Inside, the distance between our worlds still felt enormous. Yet for the first time, it no longer felt impossible. Then Ethan reached into his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. What is that? I asked. A strange look crossed his face. Something between hesitation and determination. The reason I spent an entire week trying to find you. I looked at the folded paper for several seconds before reaching for it. Something in Ethan's expression told me this was not a business proposal, not a contract, not a billionaire's version of gratitude. His usual confidence had faded. In its place was something far more vulnerable. Carefully, I unfolded the page. At first, I thought it was a medical report. Then I noticed the date. It was from the night I found him beside the river. Several sections had been highlighted. I scanned the page, confused. Stress, exhaustion, severe sleep deprivation, recommendations for immediate rest. I looked up. You want me to read your medical paperwork? A faint smile touched his face. Keep going. I lowered my eyes again. Attached to the report was another page. This one was handwritten. The handwriting was neat but uneven in places, as if it had been written during a difficult moment. The first sentence caught my attention immediately. If someone had not stopped for me that night, I would have continued pretending everything was fine. My eyes moved down the page. Ethan had written about endless meetings, impossible expectations, and years spent carrying responsibilities that seemed to multiply faster than solutions. There was nothing dramatic about the words. That was what made them powerful. The honesty felt raw, real. By the time I reached the final paragraph, the noise of the cafe had disappeared around me. Sometimes people assume success protects you from loneliness. It does not. Sometimes it only gives you a nicer place to hide it. I slowly folded the paper. You wrote this. He nodded. The day after I left the hospital. I studied him carefully. Why are you showing me? Ethan looked out the window toward the lights of Millennium Park. For a moment, he seemed to search for the right answer. Because everyone knows the public version of me. His eyes returned to mine. You met the real one. The simplicity of the statement unsettled me. Not because it sounded romantic. It did not. It sounded sincere. That somehow felt more dangerous. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup. You barely knew me. That is true. Then how could you trust me? A small laugh escaped him. I trusted you the moment you ignored my request and called an ambulance anyway. I rolled my eyes. You are still holding that against me? Quite the opposite. His smile lingered. Then his expression grew serious again. Emily, do you know how many people stopped beside that river before you did? I shook my head. Security footage showed 7. The answer surprised me. 7. 7 people walked past. His voice remained calm. Not bitter. Just factual. You were the only one who stopped. Silence settled between us. Outside, evening had deepened into night. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. Cars moved through downtown traffic like streams of white and red light. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. I spent a week trying to understand why. Why what? Why someone with every reason to keep walking chose not to. I stared at him. Then I laughed softly. You hired investigators to answer that question? To my surprise, he looked almost embarrassed. Perhaps. That is the most billionaire thing I have ever heard. This time his laughter came easily. Genuine. Unforced. For a moment, neither of us felt like people from different worlds. We were simply 2 people sharing coffee in a Chicago cafe. Then Ethan's phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up. His expression changed instantly. Not fear. Not anger. Concern. He read the message and slowly exhaled. I noticed it immediately. What happened? He hesitated. Then he turned the phone toward me. The message contained a photograph of my apartment building. Beneath it were only 4 words. We found her too. For several seconds, I simply stared at the phone screen. The photograph showed my apartment building exactly as it looked every day. The faded brick exterior. The narrow entrance. The old fire escapes. Running up the side. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet the message made my stomach tighten immediately. We found her too. I looked up at Ethan. Who sent that? His jaw tightened slightly. It was the first time I had seen genuine tension in his expression. Someone I was hoping would lose interest. That is not an answer. He nodded once. I know. The cafe suddenly felt different. The warm lights. The soft music. The comfortable atmosphere. All of it seemed farther away now. Ethan locked his phone and placed it face down on the table. A few investors have been unhappy with certain decisions I made over the last year. Investors? People with money. I laughed nervously. That does not narrow it down. To my surprise, he smiled briefly. Then the seriousness returned. Some people dislike uncertainty. The night I disappeared created uncertainty. I folded my arms. And now they are interested in me? Possibly. Why? His eyes held mine. Because people notice anything that matters to someone in my position. The answer landed heavily between us. I was not sure whether it sounded flattering or terrifying. Maybe both. Outside, rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows. Chicago looked beautiful at night. Endless lights stretching across the skyline. Moving reflections on wet pavement. Yet for the first time in days, I found myself wanting to go home. Ethan seemed to notice. Emily. His voice softened. I do not think you are in danger. That is not a comforting sentence. Another small smile appeared. Fair point. He glanced toward the window for a moment before returning his attention to me. But I would like to be cautious. Meaning I would like to make sure you get home safely. I rolled my eyes. I have survived 27 years without billionaire security teams. And I am very happy about that. The answer came so quickly that I almost missed it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Something shifted in the silence. Something warm. Something unexpected. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and immediately frowned. The screen showed a notification from my landlord. Rent reminder. Final notice. Due in 3 days. I quickly locked the phone. Too late. Ethan had already seen my expression. Everything okay? Of course. Emily. I sighed. Just normal life. He said nothing. That somehow made it worse. Rent, I admitted. Nothing dramatic. His gaze lowered briefly to the worn sleeves of my jacket. The delivery bag beside my chair. The shoes that had carried me through hundreds of miles of city streets. Then he looked back at me. Not with pity. Never pity. With understanding. You work very hard. I laughed softly. That is one way to describe it. It is the accurate way. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. He checked the screen and exhaled slowly. This time, the tension eased from his shoulders. Good news? I asked. Possibly. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The people who sent the message have moved on to another topic. Relief washed through me. More relief than I wanted to admit. Ethan stood and reached for his coat. Come on. Where are we going? He smiled. Not the billionaire smile from magazine covers. The real one. You spent an entire night making sure a stranger was okay. I think I can at least walk you home. The walk home should have felt awkward. It did not. Rain drifted gently across the city, turning streetlights into soft halos of gold and white. Ethan carried his coat over one arm while we moved through downtown Chicago at an unhurried pace. For the first time since meeting him, nobody seemed to be asking anything from him. No reporters. No executives. No endless stream of notifications demanding his attention. He looked almost relaxed. Almost. You know, I said, glancing sideways at him. If people could see you right now, they would probably be confused. A faint smile appeared. Why? Because the internet makes you look intimidating. He laughed quietly. And what do I look like now? I considered the question. Tired. That earned a genuine laugh. Fair. We crossed a small bridge overlooking the river. Water reflected the city skyline like liquid glass. The view was beautiful enough to make people stop and take photographs. Ethan stopped too, resting his hands lightly on the railing. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city hummed around us. Distant traffic. Passing trains. The quiet rhythm of a place that never truly slept. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. His gaze remained fixed on the water below. What do you want? The question surprised me. Right now? In life? I stared at him. Nobody had asked me that in years. Most conversations revolved around what I needed. Rent. Bills. Work. Survival. Wanting felt like a luxury. I do not know, I admitted. That is not true. It is. He shook his head. Everyone wants something. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I smiled softly. Peace. Ethan looked at me. Peace. A place where I am not constantly worried about the next payment, the next problem, the next crisis. I shrugged. Nothing dramatic. His expression changed slightly, as if that answer affected him more than I intended. That sounds dramatic to me. We resumed walking. Several blocks later, my apartment building finally came into view. The old brick structure looked exactly as it always did. Small. Worn. Forgettable. Yet something unexpected caught my attention. A moving truck sat parked outside. Workers carried furniture through the entrance. That is strange, I said. Ethan followed my gaze. What is? Nobody ever moves into this building. We approached the entrance together. My landlord stood near the front steps holding a clipboard. The second he saw me, his face brightened. Emily. I stopped. That alone was unusual. My landlord rarely looked happy about anything. Good evening, Mr. Harper. He hurried toward me. I have been trying to reach you, not entirely sure whether I believed him. I stared at Ethan for several seconds. He stared right back. Calm. Composed. Almost amused. The problem was that I had already learned how difficult it was to read him. You are innocent. I repeated. Completely. That sounded rehearsed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I have had practice. Mr. Harper looked between us, clearly enjoying a conversation he did not understand. Whoever paid it also left instructions. My attention immediately shifted back to him. Instructions? He nodded and handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written neatly across the front. Emily Carter. My heart skipped. Ethan's expression changed the moment he saw the envelope. Not panic. Recognition. You have seen this before, I said. He exhaled softly. I think I know who sent it. Underestimate what that is worth. I folded the paper carefully. Something inside my chest felt different. Lighter somehow. Ethan watched me quietly. I told her not to contact you. Clearly she ignored that. She has been ignoring me for 35 years. Another laugh escaped me. The city felt strangely peaceful. Cars passed in the distance. Rain whispered against the pavement. The moving truck I noticed earlier finally pulled away from the curb. For the first time in a very long time, I was not thinking about rent, or bills, or tomorrow's deliveries. I was thinking about possibility. Ethan glanced toward the skyline beyond the buildings. Then back at me. Emily. The seriousness in his voice immediately caught my attention. What? He hesitated. Just briefly. That night beside the river. You saved someone who had forgotten how to stop running. His eyes held mine. Honest. Vulnerable. Real. I thought I needed more success. More responsibility. More achievements. He shook his head slightly. You reminded me that sometimes people just need